Annyeong haseyo Yorumpon. Hello everyone. Excellencies, delegates, officials and colleagues, I am honored to have been given the opportunity to make the keynote address at this prestigious conference on e-government in Asia and the Pacific, which has been organized and supported by the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific and the United Nations Project Office on Governance. I wish to make a special mention of thanks to His Excellency Hyung Kyu Mang, Minister of Public Administration and Security of the Republic of Korea, His Excellency Hong Oh Kim, National Assembly Speaker, Republic of Korea, and Mr. Jong Moo Choi, Head, United Nations Project Office on Governance. My grateful thanks to you all and greetings from Sri Lanka to the people of Korea who are hosting us in this beautiful country. I have had a long flight, and in fact I arrived just maybe an hour before. I'm still groggy, and in the course of my speech, if I deviate from the subject, you will know why. They say a good speech should be like a lady's dress, short enough to attract attention and long enough to cover the subject. So I'll try to keep to that. But as you also heard in the introduction, I'm a politician, and they also say never to give the microphone to a politician because he'll never let it go. So you guys better pray that I'm not going to behave like a politician today. In a world where almost close to half the population has yet to use a telephone, and when there are around 1 billion illiterate adults, some people argue that using IT for development is inappropriate and ineffective. By 2001, only 8% of the world population was using internet. By 2009, this had increased to 27%. But in the South Asian countries, Sri Lanka had the highest score of yet only 8.7% internet users of the total population. And Bangladesh had the lowest score of only 0.4% internet users. But then, in this age of the information revolution, like any revolutionary process, this revolution is transforming all processes it touches, from financial transactions to the provision of education. The internet has changed the way people live, work, and do business forever. Our focus then today must be to bridge the digital divide in poorer countries and to ensure that the poor are among its beneficiaries and not its casualties. In this context, e-government has to play a critical role. An important quote by Charles Darwin comes to my mind at this point, in which he says, quote, "It is not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change," unquote. What has been the Asia-Pacific region's response to change that is necessary in the context of e-government? I will try to address this question to some extent. Today, most of the Asia-Pacific countries are institutionalizing e-government and are not questioning the potential of information and communications. They accept how important it is. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia, His Excellency Mahathir Mohamad, certified the mindset of the region's politicians in a statement he made when he was in office. I quote, "In the information age we are living in, the Malaysian society must be information rich. It can be no accident that there is today no wealthy developed country that is information poor, and no information rich country that is poor and underdeveloped," unquote. When properly developed, ICTs are seen to play an important role in stimulating economic growth and development by providing new and better methods of production, making accessibility to previously inaccessible and unattainable markets within the reach of the poor, and improving the delivery of government services. Years ago, citizens had to physically go to a relevant government department for any transaction, and it was done manually and painfully slowly too. Today, in most of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, the usage of internet portals have helped create citizen service centers at convenient locations where citizens can access online services. However, each country in the Asia-Pacific region is at a different level or stage of development and growth in e-government. I will not be able to make a comprehensive assessment or comparison on all or most of these countries due to my limited time, but I will try to focus on some of them and some salient issues that we should be addressing here. Basically, Australia, Singapore, and South Korea, to name a few, have evolved to a mature stage in the process of implementation of e-government. China is in the early stages, but growing rapidly, whilst India has progressed considerably well, though in a rather uneven fashion. For example, in some states in India, such as Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, states are far ahead, while there are some states which lag far behind. In a paper written by Subhash Bhatnagar of the Indian Institute of Management, he identifies certain challenges faced by the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, some of the salient challenges. One, the scope and coverage of e-government applications is limited, and unless coverage is widespread, covering most of the departments and government agencies, the overall impact on investment climate, citizen convenience, government efficiency, and corruption will be marginal. Two, despite access to e-government and supporting infrastructure improvement in urban areas, most rural areas in most countries have negligible e-government penetration. For example, only 0.2% of PCs are being used in 600,000 odd villages in India out of the total. Three, the fact that e-government will reduce corruption and help the poor to access a more efficient service has not been fully exploited, and a key challenge is to design and implement e-government applications that can harness the full potential of e-government as a tool to build transparent and corruption-free service delivery. Four, most e-service applications have reported failure rates that have been quite high, mainly among e-government projects. Making e-government ventures sustainable is a challenge. And five, capacity development is a major challenge that has to be addressed. An enabling policy and legal framework is needed for development of infrastructure, as well as for enabling processes reforms that require new legislations to be enacted. Based on the above mentioned five challenges, the following issues are commonly identified, mainly in the South Asian countries in particular. And I wish to raise these issues because they are very interesting. One is the delivery channel. How do you get citizens to access e-government applications? The penetration of internet to villages is poor, and how can citizens access e-services? Is it possible? Even though there are telecenters, still there is a limitation of telecenter usages. Two, the literacy problem. How do you ensure that citizens understand what they read? How can they communicate on e-channels if they are illiterate? It's a major problem. Three, the language problem. In countries like India with multiple languages, is it sufficient to do e-government in English only? Or for that matter, in many other countries too? Four, the incentives problem. For government workers, government employees make money by delaying and demanding bribes. E-government changes this position. Thus, state employees have a pervasive incentive to destroy efforts at automation. Government employees also like to keep information to themselves, as information is power, and they try not to reveal vital information to the ordinary public. These are important issues. I like to quote what Lord Bevin said to Mahatma Gandhi at the point of India gaining independence in 1947. I quote, 18 languages, 500 dialects, some 30 religions, 1 million gods and goddesses, 300 million individuals, an infinity of castes and subcastes, and a population that is practically illiterate, and half of which are beggars or thieves. Good luck, sir. Such a nation is ungovernable. It will take you centuries to get you anywhere. Unquote. This is what he said in 1947. Contrary to what Lord Bevin said, today in half a century, India has proved itself to be a world power and is successfully implementing e-government. Therefore, despite these huge challenges, the opportunities are great. I'd like to refer to a survey that was done where a Sri Lankan think tank called Learn Asia was part of that survey. The model of delivering e-government via internet has drawbacks as shown in survey data representing 397 million people at the bottom of the pyramid in India, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka and Thailand. First, only 49% had even heard of internet and only 2.6% had used it. Second, it will take time to roll out sufficient telecenters, and then the question of sustainability of these telecenters comes in. The lack of ICT knowledge has resulted in high costs and failures. Thailand, Bangladesh, Philippines, Sri Lanka have suffered these consequences at some moments of time. Today, the use of mobile phones is becoming an end device for e-service delivery, and the bottom of the pyramid section use mobile phones. This mode might have a greater penetration for rural areas and can be seen as an opportunity to increase access of e-government. Currently, when internet is barely reaching 10.3 million at the bottom of the pyramid in these countries I referred to, it is argued by some that phones are cheaper, more immediate and an ideal tool for Asian governments to inform, transact and interact with almost 400 million of their most needy citizens. For example, if we look at the number of phone users at the bottom of the pyramid in these countries, it seems enlightening. For example, if you take the bottom of the pyramid in the countries I mentioned and look at the phone ownership, in Bangladesh, 43% of the bottom of the pyramid own phones. In Pakistan, 41% own phones. In India, 45% own phones. In Sri Lanka, 73% own phones. In Philippines, 63%. And in Thailand, 91%. That's quite high compared to internet access. If you look at the same way, there is no divergence between the urban and rural sectors in phone ownership. If you compare the urban and rural sector in Bangladesh, 44% in the urban sector own phones, and in 43% in the rural sector own phones. Similarly, in Pakistan, it is 56% and 32%. And in India, it's 47% and 44%. In Sri Lanka, it's 75% and 73%. In Philippines, 70 and 60%. In Thailand, 96 and 90%. So there's hardly any difference between the urban and rural sector as far as mobile phones are being used. However, mobile phone applications, there is one more thing, that when you look at the e-government services that are accessible on phones, and if you look at the usage of government services on mobile phones, then the picture is slightly different. Because in Bangladesh, only 0.2% use government services, they use the mobile phone to access government services. In Pakistan, it's only 0.3%. In India, it's only 0.1%. But in Sri Lanka, it's a high of 35%. In Philippines, it's a 20%. And in Thailand, it's a 10%. However, mobile phone applications are limited, and there are many other issues that have to be solved. Incentivizing government employees, fundamental changes in government salary scales, capacity building, overcoming language barriers, improving internet access in rural areas, policy and legal structures, political commitment are some of the few. Therefore, to achieve excellence in e-government requires an integrated vision that is politically inspiring and administratively pragmatic. The commitment to e-government has to come from the political leadership, and different governments have to set up specific agencies to oversee e-government initiatives in almost all countries in Asia Pacific. Malaysia has set up the Malaysian Administrative Modernization and Management Planning Unit under the Prime Minister himself. In India, an electronic governance division and Centre for e-governance within the Department of Information Technology was established to better coordinate and drive its e-government movement. In Sri Lanka, the Information and Communication Technology Agency of Sri Lanka was established in July 2003 and is the apex ICT institution of the government and comes directly under the Presidential Secretariat, and it drives e-government. Currently in Sri Lanka, over 600 government institutions have a chief information officer to lead e-government programs, and the ICTA has been training more people in the government sector. ICT-enabled reforms have yielded many benefits, including lower administrative costs and faster and more accurate responses across the Asia-Pacific region. The progress due to e-government is tremendous. In Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, the country has been working to simplify administrative procedures faced by businesses as a way of promoting investment. A one-stop shop for business license applications has been established, where businesses can apply once online and thereby initiate action from all the concerned agencies. In Hyderabad, India, the Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewerage Board uses its single window cell to reduce corruption for new connections. Previously, applications were made to one of 120 officers and then forwarded to 14 other staff members before approval, each requiring what we call speed payments or bribes. Under the single window cell, the application process is centralized in one public place with applications recorded on computers that are difficult for corrupt officials to alter. There has been great service improvement. Some countries, such as Singapore and Hong Kong, are in a much higher and advanced stage, and for that matter Korea. They have comprehensive systems where a web portal or smart card integrates information and services from various government agencies to enable citizens to get a wide array of services irrespective of the relevant government service that is responsible for providing that particular service. In a 2004 worldwide ranking of e-government maturity, Singapore was ranked second out of 22 countries surveyed, and Korea in a worldwide ranking came first. That's great for Asia Pacific. Even bottom of the ranking countries are facing challenges and yielding the benefits of e-government. In Bangladesh, for example, as far back as in 2001, in Rajshahi city, a birth registration information system has been used for registering births online, and this has been linked to a database that can be shared with other public agencies. Before the system was set up, a simple query such as number of girls registered took a long time to answer. Today, both registration rates and immunization rates and records have increased tremendously. Therefore, as much as there are looming challenges, there are great opportunities and successes, and we have seen what works and what doesn't. Measuring e-government is very important. Measuring e-government is a challenge given the diversity of approaches. Some important common threads include a country's economic strength, technological development, and aggregate levels of education. Although methodological work on the United Nations e-government survey has helped answer some of the issues in e-government measurements, there is no common international framework for evaluation. The United Nations e-government development index is widely recognized as an authoritative measure of public sector capacity to provide electronic and mobile services. It is still just one of the several measurements developed and used both by the public and private sector organizations to meet their own needs for assessing the state of e-government measurement. An international consensus about how to assess e-government performance is needed. An international task force on e-government indicators was established in 2006, but a total consensus has not really been arrived at. There are substantial challenges to monitoring the efficacy of e-government development. Most of the statistics are obtained from supply-side indicators. Little information is yet available on the demand side of e-government. Few surveys exist that would indicate how citizens use their services and what they see as maximizing public value. A global agreement on a consistent framework for measuring e-government, therefore, is a need of the day. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, last but not least is the need for finding political champions to drive the move towards e-government. In many countries, especially the underdeveloped countries, the citizens and the public would vote their public representative based on how many jobs he gave, how many schools were available, how many houses were built, or how much of welfare was transferred to the people. I think the last thing in the voters' mind in their wish list might be e-government. That is because of the lack of awareness of its benefits to them. So will politicians put their necks out for e-government? Politicians will calculate how much votes it will bring them. So you need to work on making people aware of how e-government will make their lives better, so that they will put pressure on their elected representatives in turn to promote e-government. Take Chandrababu Naidu, the famous Chief Minister of Karnataka state in India. He transformed Bangalore into the world's Silicon Valley and put India on the map of ICT. People in his state became computer literate and connectivity access was increased. Jobs were created. But still, finally, he lost the elections because there were many more pressing problems for the people. We should work on a strategy to make e-government attractive to the public and to create an environment where citizens, especially those at the bottom of the pyramid, will demand e-government services as their right. Thank you.